The last model we're going to talk about in this module is the Unified Process Model, sometimes called the Rational Unified Process, or RUP, because of its association with Rational, the company that released Rational Rose, which is a UML-based development environment. UML stands for Unified Modeling Language. This is a framework for modeling your software using standardized diagrams. We're going to talk a lot about UML in future modules because we will use it to help us understand both the analysis model and the design model. But for now, know that the unified process is closely associated with UML. In this first bullet, a use case is simply a scenario or story that corresponds to one of the requirements. Use cases have a specific format that is typically followed, and use cases are associated with UML. Architecture-centric means that the existence of a strong design and overall architecture is a central feature of this process model. In the UML, architectures are typically represented with class diagrams. And finally, the unified process is also iterative or evolutionary in that it delivers progressively more functionality with each successive iteration. The unified process has 4 phases: inception, elaboration, construction, and transition. Here's Pressman's diagram of the unified process. And honestly, if I were just looking at Pressman's diagram for, say, the prototype model, the spiral model, and the unified process model, I would be hard-pressed to find a lot of differences. They all look pretty much like the same model. It's really not even that much of a stretch to throw the incremental model in with these, even though Pressman claims it's not evolutionary, because the incremental model just begins a software increment a little earlier than the other models do. Anyway, that's just an observation because I don't think most people would see the unified process in this way. Like the spiral model, Pressman seems to be superimposing the waterfall over each iteration of the unified process. And in both these models, that is what I would call a misleading oversimplification. Unfortunately, before I can give you a good alternative to Pressman's view of the unified process model, I'm going to have to talk about agile development, which will be the topic of next week's module. Now, this is an informative slide indicating the work products delivered in each phase of the unified process. Looking at this list of work products, I would say that it's fairly accurate. The inception phase is primarily about making the business case to proceed with the project. The elaboration phase work products could be a bit misleading because it talks about supplementary requirements. In fact, the elaboration phase is typically the phase in which you gather the vast majority of your requirements. And therefore, it's also the phase in which you create most of your prototypes, since prototypes are meant to nail down your requirements. The construction phase is where you do most of your coding and testing. And the transition phase is where you prepare your software for release. The item delivered software increment is misleading here for the same reasons I think Pressman's unified process diagram is misleading. In the real unified process model, increments that involve many waterfalls are typically occurring throughout the phases, especially the elaboration and the construction phases. To emphasize this, here's an iterative example of a unified process. In the figure on the left, the inception phase only involves one iteration, I1. The elaboration phase involves two iterations, E1 and E2. The construction phase involves four iterations, C1 through C4. And the transition phase involves two iterations. And you can see how all the framework activities, which are listed down the left-hand side of the figure, are involved to a greater or lesser degree within each iteration of each phase. So based on this figure alone, we see that Pressman's account is somewhat flawed. The figure on the right just shows that the construction phase of the UP model is the one that takes up most resources. And that concludes this module. As I've said, we'll revisit the unified process in another module after we've talked about agile development, which is the topic of our next module. So I'll see you there.